have a question. So we were debugging earlier and Gabriel said, hey, that didn't turn green. Do we have any audio hooks for those things?
So depends what you mean. Do you mean in the scene editor? Do you mean in your game that you're writing? What do you mean?
In the compiler. So like we were looking for a variable. And if it's
you mean like
correct variable, it turns green.
A variable turn green? Yeah, so there is no, as far as I know, there's no operating system hook for that kind of semantics inside the system that we connect to for green. And even if there was, it turns out that a lot of the hooks that are provided to the screen reader for color and fonts and stuff you can get, but it's actually pretty difficult. So I think that for a typical kid, you would have to have not just knowledge of screen readers, but you'd have to have some pretty significant expertise to actually get it. So we've talked about adding in some additional, so like, for example, if you're on a line of code, you could probably do things like request font information and color information and stuff like that if we pass it down in the right way. However, you wouldn't get it by default, even if you're an expert level screen reader user. And it's going to vary by which screen reader you use, because each one decides what they actually render to the user in audio. There are other things we could do. We could add things like beeping. We could add things like that. But there are downsides for doing each of them. So we don't have a good solution for it right now. There are ways to manage it, but we sort of decided not to in the most recent releases. If people prefer us to try something else, we can, but there are pros and cons. When you feed stuff to the screen reader and it uses it, it can have downsides too. So that's the thing. So that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a nice tell. Hey, my color turned off. I've got something not working right.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, for example, if we add that into the screen reader, you would have to know to request it, because screen readers don't oralize it no matter what we do. So they just won't. So because it's sort of like, you can imagine at the operating system level, the screen reader can request information about what's on the line, but it wouldn't just magically know that anything changed. So a kid would have to know to request it, which kind of mitigates the entire point of having the colors in the first place. So the only other thing that you can do is add things like, the one exception to that is spelling errors. Spelling errors are announced, but that's not a spelling error. That's not an error at all. It's actually something different. So the question is, do screen readers have an auto announce hook? And I think the answer is no, they do not have one at the operating system level. So
I don't think it's operating system level, but through, like, for example, the JAWS scripting language in Microsoft Word now, you can have it announce color changes and such, and it's a feature you can turn on and off.
Yeah, I believe that, because if it's sent to the system, it'll have those properties. But that's why you're saying it has to be in scripts, because you have to tell the system you want that announced, right?
Yeah, you can turn that on and off. Also, too, and I'm not, to tell you the truth, I think it's a JAWS command, not a Microsoft command. But
I can tell you with certainty it would have to be, because Microsoft doesn't actually dictate to the screen reader what it states, so it has to be JAWS.
But then say there's a keyboard command now that I use a lot to jump to the next change point in my text. So whether it's a bold or an underline or a color change or a font change, I'm pretty sure it's a JAWS feature. And man, that makes it so much easier to check out a document instead of going through line by line and checking things out. It just takes to the next change point. And then I examine like, oh yeah, I really did want that font change here. Cool. Jump to the next point. And it's so much easier.
We do have something for change points in there related to changes from the last version of the file related to Git. And there are hooks in there for that. But they're not based on font, because those can change like every few seconds. So it's going to be weird for coding.
Yeah, I was thinking for the inside the editor, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. So was I, actually. But in any case, we can revisit this issue. It might be something we'll want to rethink at some point. But I guess I'm trying to express it's pretty complicated. So it's not like it's probably not a whole community discussion without going into the details of what it would do. So anyway.
No big deal. I was just wondering.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're not here, say aye.
Hi,
Aye.
Captain.
Yeah, Co's not here. Great. Good job, Co. Steve's not here. All right. I can always count on my curriculum committee to speak up for me. Good job, guys. Good job. All right. I think we are almost done. Huzzah. Who's excited? None of you. Take a nap. Wait. Trying to get all my things in line here. Sorry. Our last lesson is completing quest behaviors. Bum, bum, bum. So, we're going to finish up the game. And we're going to take a couple minutes here to think about accessibility across the board of our games, which a couple of us were just talking about. We're going to look at building some accessibility features, captioning maybe into our game. And that's pretty much the goal for right now, is just those fine tuning and tweaking and working on our projects, having some fun with them. Okay. So, brainstorming accessibility. We're not talking about, there's all forms of accessibility, right? It's not just for visual impairments. There's, hearing, motor, learning, medical, you name it. There's different things that need different accessibility. So, what could we add to our games overall to help make them more accessible? This is a group discussion. Discuss.
I know what I did last time.
Excellent.
Which was I added magnification. And I'll probably do it this time too if I get the time. But
how did you add magnification to your game? Did you just let it zoom in with the camera?
Yeah, I did a zoom in with the camera.
Cool. That's a cool idea.
And in fact, it's interesting you mentioned this because I have a question. Now, given that we need to debug my game, and I will have to display coordinates to sighted people, what's the most effective way for me to do that? Don't tell me the output statement because that's in the Quorum Studio console. I would rather don't have to go back to the game window. I want to show it in the game itself.
Do you mean graphically?
Yeah, I mean, for all of you who've got working eyes, what's the most effective way of me?
There is a class called the label, and the label is a user interface class, and you can add a label to a game just like you can anything else. And if you don't want it to have a screen reader hooks and stuff, then you just add it to the game and then change its value, and that's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I'm outputting in screen. I mean, I'm outputting everything in a screen reader form. Where do I put this label to make things accessible?
To make it accessible to people that can see, you can just add it to the game and set its position and its size, just like you can anything else, like boxes and stuff like that. It gets added by default to the 2D layer. So it'll show up in the screen with 0, 0 as the bottom left coordinate, and the top right will be the window size and height, width and height. So that's by default, it has some value. I forget what it is, like 800 by 600 or something. And then, but yeah, it's 0, 0 through width and height. And you can change the font and stuff too if you want. So, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good enough. So yeah. I will try and do that.
I think by default, it shows up in the bottom left corner, which is honestly fine if you're trying to show some kind of status. But if you want to make it like the top left corner, then you have to do the math, like get the height, subtract it, and figure out its X position and stuff like that. So
yep, that's okay.
Yeah.
And the other class of accessibility is people with motor impairments who I haven't really met, but I have no idea how I would make something like a buggy spaceship accessible to them? What does it even mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have a ready answer to, honestly. That's why this is a discussion.
I have a few thoughts, but don't want to capitalize. But I'll say briefly, people with motor impairments have lots of different kinds of conditions. So, if you have cerebral palsy, there are all sorts of innovations that have been made to try and make them easier, but it depends on what it is. Like if you have, I forget what the name of it was, but the condition that Stephen Hawking's had, or people like him, they often use, scanning devices that scan over keyboards. I know a woman in Georgia that she does math. She's a mathematician. She does all of her mathematical proofs with eye trackers with her eyes because she can't really easily move her hands or her feet. And so that's interesting. So she does programming with her eyes. That requires some special innovations on the programming side to make it work right. There's all sorts of stuff. So
Does Quorum support eye trackers?
Well, eye trackers, it turns out, go through keyboard events, believe it or not.
Oh, nice.
So
okay.
It turns out that they send you keyboard data. And there are some eye tracking systems that send joystick events. And if I recall correctly, there's one of them called OptiKey that does that sends events to the system that we don't usually send up to the user because they're not used very often. We didn't even know that OptiKey used them. But so I think there's a couple more we need to expose for certain very specialized systems. But that's that's different. So
okay.
But a lot of them use keyboard events. Yeah.
So. Okay. Cool.
Something you can think about for motor disabilities is that if the person does have some ability to move a couple fingers, the proximity of what keys you're asking them to access is important. So maybe they can use the arrow keys, but then having them reach over to the escape key on the top left-hand part of the keyboard might not be possible.
Yeah.
Also, to a generic thing within Windows, turning off key repeat sometimes is a helpful thing for people with limited physical navigating of the keyboard. If they accidentally hold the arrow key down, it might not give the desired effect of making something move. If you might want just only be able to press it. Only send one keystroke through to the application instead of 35 down arrows.
Yeah, oftentimes Windows will try to tell me I need that function because I've set my cup on my keyboard or something like that. Did you want to turn on sticky keys? No, I want to not use my keyboard as a cup holder. That's what I want to do.
Well, sticky keys is different than key repeat, but that is another helpful one too. That will cause the idea of that they can touch the control key. It remembers you touched it, then you press the other key, and then it's like, oh, you wanted the control T? You now got it.
Yeah, got it. Wrong one, you're right.
And I'm guessing Quorum respects that feature.
Well, it depends what you mean by respects, because Quorum is a programming language, right? So like what it respects is whatever you tell it to respect. So, it's not a lot of these things. It's the difference between using an application and inventing an application. Because like when you're inventing something, suppose you wanted to write an application that straight up did something funny with the keyboard. Well, you should be able to do that, right?
Yes.
Because that's the goal. So it's not so much that it respects it or doesn't, it's that it is a way for you to manipulate what the computer does. And you can decide as the programmer what you do. So it's kind of neutral, I guess is what I'm saying. So it doesn't really care what you do. It just says, do what you want. So, which maybe is a little bit weird, but now if you're talking about a specific application built on Quorum, whether it does, that's a totally different issue.
Yeah. No, but I've also been thinking, we are adding music to our games. What do we do about deaf people? And I'm really curious as a developer how to add accessibility. I know blind, I don't know any of the other variants, and I'm very curious to see what we can do.
You could
And being
also
honest, sorry.
you could also consider the ability to turn music on and off. So that
Yes.
is something that happens with a lot of games. If you look at APH's Code Quest, you can turn off certain features because maybe some kids or other people wouldn't want that repetitious music, while others would find it really motivating. Some of the things they do is when you place different buttons, you have a different sound effect for each button. So if you were deaf, you would really focus, I would guess, on high contrast and different visual symbols.
What I was going to say, unfortunately, to me, background music is like, I can't take credit for this phrase, but it's a blind man's fog. You know, it's just noise interfering with the environment. If you have to rely on other audible cues to get a task done or walk through a certain area, you know, in real life, even noise can be, in a sense, a fog. It interferes your ability to navigate through some places. So turning it on off, I think, is a good feature. But for the deafblind, of course, obviously, hopefully they have a braille display, and you definitely got to send messages to the braille display so that they can know that, you know, they had was a collision, or, you know, you successfully found the item, or turn right thing.
Actually, I'm wondering whether, as developers, we can sort of expand our, what we learn to actually implement accessibility in the game objects themselves. You know, like as we, for example, go through the game, maybe we could like get the objects, like for example, we were doing something about voiceover, so we can voice over objects to speak, or to or place icons on objects so that other disabled people can interact with it with their fingers or something like that. You know, I think it's the responsibility of us developers to try to think of ways in which we can make our games more accessible. So rather than just use screen readers or things like that, we could actually use the objects of our games to accessify, if there's such a word, our game.
I have a kind of thought on this, and it's not the answer at all, just a thought. That's Amanda and Steve and I went through adapting the code.org CSP curriculum into Quorum version of it and stuff like that. And we kind of at the beginning started with, let's make the existing program or curriculum accessible to the blind students. That's our three of us expertise are. So, but as we go through the especially the coding part, and then also the programming the games and stuff like that, that's the some of the original code.org program, the project is based on purely visual fun. And then so yeah, there could be a way that we could adapt that's program into the something that's blind children, we're talking about children, not adult, understand what's going on and on the screen. But at the end, even if they are able to do that, that's product that's took so many effort for the children to create, blind children to create visual, the visual product is not fun at all for them at the end. And so it just come to the conclusion in my case that not all the games you know, enjoyable to certain, when you have a certain condition, and that's kind of what we struggle with, you know, as
You
I'm.
know, uh, you bring up a very interesting point. You say that not all games were enjoyable, right?
Yes.
How did we test that? How do we know? Because being a blind person, my sense is you as a developer should not be deciding what I can and cannot enjoy, or what I will or what I won't enjoy. You have to either make it accessible or give me hooks into your application so that I can interface my adaptive technology and pull information from there. Now, that might be naive slash idealistic, but that's what I'm thinking. And yeah, purely visual. Uh, I don't know. I would sort of enjoy adding sound effects to a ship bouncing across the screen, which would be mostly visual. But yeah, I would need to add an accessibility layer to the thing.
I understand that, and I think you are right that we, at the end we really don't know who enjoys what, and so your idea is well taken, and it's kind of yeah, sometimes really hard to with lots of you know games. Requires like eye hand coordination, very very sharp reflex, that
Hmm.
so even the sighted person, some sighted person would have trouble with playing that. And then yeah, I guess I just struggle with the when we make it into the auditory accessible on that game, how once again, I guess I probably don't understand how enjoyable it's gonna be. That's probably what it is. That's my kind of shortcoming.
Yeah, and I hear you completely. For example, um, what I think we need to distinguish is there are certain activities we can't do effectively. I'll give you a very simple example. My employer launched a leadership feedback survey. What he did, the way they did the question, the first question was pick up this element and drop it. You know, if you want your leaders to have these top 3 traits, which out of these 5 traits do you want your leaders to show? And you had to pick up those traits and drag them. Now, I completely agree with you that making something like that accessible doesn't make any sense. You should just give an alternative interface, drop it. But I think the whole uh, game, maybe what we should do is we should make it accessible, and if we as developers can't figure it out, at least give hooks. Now again, uh, I know screen readers the best, so hooks, what I mean is that, okay, like whatever games we are doing, uh, they all have keyboards. Most of them are using keyboard events. Now, if someone uses an eye tracker, at least there's a hook which says, okay, these are keyboard events. We will maybe accept keyboard input from other programs. In fact, that's what's happened in the NVDA screen reader. It never worked with Dragon Professional earlier, but in some versions back, they introduced this feature where you can actually manipulate NVDA keys using other applications. So I think we should distinguish between games and different tasks in the game, and then maybe see. And you may have already done this, and then see how to render those tasks in an accessible way.
Okay. And we're having a really good discussion on what parts of things can be easily made accessible in different ways. But I think should maybe move on back to our games and back to our own ideas, our own projects right now. One thing, I'm gonna hop just slightly out of order because I think it will help for the next task. I'm gonna reverse the two tasks on this list here, is showing how to put labels into your game so that you can have, instead of output to the console, output to the screen, which is that idea of closed captioning or open captioning, however you want to. It would be open caption because it's burned into the screen. So that we can add that as a level of accessibility or just reference on the screen. So this is going to take me a second to find again because I have 4 million tabs open as I do in my brain.
Did you just say you have 4 million tabs open in your brain? Like,
yes.
That's funny.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Sorry, it took me a second for my brain to find the right tab to recognize the. Never mind.
Uh-huh. So what we're going to look at here. So identify the precise. Yes, Adam, that sounds great. I put. This is just a reference page for the label library. But if you just look at the top example code, it does a pretty darn good job of telling you how to set up a label in your game. It's very similar to how we've set up almost everything else. Okay, it does have its own library. We're going to set up the label object, and then you are able to set text to it, set position to it, and also you can set the size of the text. I believe we can play with some font, we can play with some color. One thing we haven't had to do yet in our game is add a graphic to the screen because we've been using the scene editor that automatically kind of grabs them and adds them to us. So for the label, we are also going to have to explicitly add it to the screen. So I know I ran through that really fast. I'm just gonna
I should say one thing really briefly here. You'll notice, and I'm just gonna shine a lantern on it. In this particular example code for label, the actual last 2 characters of the word end are missing in the thing. That is because some idiot on the team, and I'm looking at myself because it was my fault, when I regenerated all of these examples, somehow I cut off the last 2 characters on all of them. And I didn't notice it until Gabriel, if he's on, pointed it out to me pretty briefly before Epic. And so that will be fixed at some point in time soon, but just be aware there's 2 characters missing at the end of many of the examples for some bloody reason or another. So
Epic can't type. Got it.
no, it's not that. They're auto-generated. So I must have.
Oh,
when I wrote.
Yeah, how would you cut the 2 off then?
I got a funny feeling I'm like taking a substring somewhere or something, okay. And then it's like saying only gather this many characters, or I'm not sure exactly, but I did something stupid. So, because I have a computer program that generates all these pages. I don't do it manually; it take forever. So, anyway.
So I'm going to hop back over to my game, And we'll just use my actual game. We don't need that sample game for right now. And let's work through adding a label to my game. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, and now in the example code, the label was only in create game. That's where it was created. I'm going to reuse the same label for mine. I'm going to have all my text show up in the same spot on the screen every time and just like replace what shows up, right? As I need to use it or want to use it. So I'm going to create my label up under class main as game, like we've done with so many other things, right? So that's where I'm starting. Arbitrarily decide that it's going to go under my main 3D items here. Start with a capital L label. I'm going to give it the lame variable name of label because that'll make sense to me later. I get my little auto hint help here. Alt enter. If I look up at my use list, my libraries list, I have libraries.game.graphics.label. It added my library form. So I have created my object. Okay. Now I'm going to come down to create game. And I'm going to put my label into my game. First thing I want to do is label colon. I'm going to put some text in here. So set, my computer's being very slow. Set text. Paren. I already have some starting text that I put out, so I'm going to go steal it. Because why not? Use what I've already typed. My beginning directions to my person will pop up on this label. This text, so it goes in quotation marks inside my parentheses. And my label should say, to begin your quests, find your helper. Okay. Now I know that the starting size on label is fairly small and I don't love it, but I don't entirely remember what my options are. So I'm going to toggle back to that reference page and look down the list of available actions for label. I know it's set size. And I could have probably done Control F to find it a little faster, but that, I thought about it as I was scrolling. Geez, there's a lot of sets in this one. Set. Size, integer size. Oh, it just is any integer size. Okay, well, I can also set the actual size if I wanted to use 2 digits or 2 parameters for the height and width and then height of the box. But I'm going to choose just one number for my set size. And I'm going to say label. Colon, set size. I'm going to do 25 and we're just going to see what happens. Why not? I'm going to run my game. Maybe, just maybe. Aha, I missed a step. Nothing happened. I missed a step, and it's a step I miss every time. I have to add my label to the screen. I swear every graphic I've ever added to a game, I have forgotten to add the first time. And in this case, it is not label : add. It is add with a capital A, open parenthesis, label, close parenthesis. unlike with our show and hide and those things, it's a little bit different.
I'm going to pop in with a quick question. It's not automatically giving me the library I need. Could you remind me what library I need for this?
Sure. And go to the top and cheat. Libraries.game.graphics.label.
Oh, I didn't get the graphics. Thank you.
And if I run my game again, I do have a label at the bottom of my screen that says to begin your quests, find your helper, and it is right along the bottom of my screen. Like the dropped letters, the G, the Y, the Q are cut off. Those things that go below the line. So I'm actually going to move my label up a little bit, I think, so that all of those letters do show up. Okay. So
Can we
Okay, question.
hang on, Steve.
I was saying, can we have that timeout? Say it was like a title or something, so it appears at first and then disappears.
Yes. You can set a timer counter doodad in your update loop and remove it at a certain time.
Oh, okay.
That English that I just spoke.
Yeah.
There's a couple other ways you can solve it too, but that's probably the easiest. Yeah, that's what I would do too.
I usually think of the easiest. My brain thinks in very primitive computer science terms.
Oh yeah, mine too.
That's quite appropriate. I think it's really easy to over-engineer stuff. So doing the simplest thing is often the right thing. So not always, but often, yeah.
And then I had cut somebody else off to let Steve talk. Who else was
All right. So I was asking, when you have you had your text cut off, right? You said your text was cut in the label.
Yes.
All right. Interesting problem. I'm not expecting a solution, but as a blind developer, how do we deal with things like this? Because fine, I've got the text, I've got the label, I know what I have to write, all that's fine. But somewhere down the line, in the positioning and sizing, if I'm a solo developer, it's going to be a challenge. And I'm wondering if there are any ideas. There used to be automatic sizing of labels and so on in Visual Studio. And that was the only control that was auto-sized. This is in Visual Studio 6. I don't know what
There are built-in formatting tools in the user interface layers. They're complicated, so they're not, I doubt we'll go through them right now.
Okay.
But they are in the user interface tutorials, and that does do auto formatting of a lot of stuff. But in this particular case, Amanda's like raw putting a label at a specific spot. So there's no way that you could do it unless you grabbed information from the font and you asked it questions like, hey, how big are you? How big is the screen? Where do you render? Stuff like that. So you can do it, but if you're doing it manually like this, then there's no automatic way to know. You either have to query the object for information, like what's your width and height and stuff, or you have to use some of the auto formatting to make sure it's all on the screen.
Okay, great. I mean, we have auto formatting. That's good to know.
It's in there for sure. So
Awesome.
It's not perfect. Like Quorum Studio itself visually is just a little bit off kilter sometimes, but we're working on that. So
that's fine. I mean, I know it'll get resolved at some stage, but it's there. I'm happy.
Yeah, and like it's much closer to being correct today than it was before. Like a lot of the windows and stuff were pretty far off, but we fixed a lot of it this release. And once this new thing called shaders comes in, we'll fix a bunch next release too. So it's like steady incremental improvement, I think is what I would say. So
okay, perfect. Thank you.
So that's the basics of setting a label. Then let's see, I'm going to do something just for grins and giggles. I'm going to throw in my key press. No, I'm going to throw in my first collision with my quest giver label again. I'm going to say text. And I'm going to have it print out, again, the output statement I had been using that showed up in my console, right? So now, if I've done this correctly, when I take my character over to the NPC, that text in the bottom, which I have a lot of text here, so I'm assuming that it's going to run over the screen, and I might have to play with some things for that. We're just going to see what happens here, and I'm showing that you can reset what text is in the label, right? That's the idea here. Again, if I've done it. It's my happy little guy. Oop, I ran into a tree and bounced off it. All right. Yep.
Hello. You have a tent to start with, but you need to build.
So
your
both
own
my
tent
audio
island.
triggered.
Find 5 rocks.
Oh, and my
then
audio
come
is
back
still
to me.
going, even though I've turned my game off, which is super fun. But it did put the label up. It like I expected, ran off the screen. So I will need to play with my, in that case.
Okay, question.
Yes.
When adding speech and printing labels to the screen, what do you do first, or does it not matter? Is there a preference?
I don't think it matters. I'm going to say it that way. The example I have my play and then my label.
That's what I just did.
And it was, to me, visually watching it, almost instantaneous. There was
Okay.
no lag between what I started to hear and when that label popped up on screen.
Okay.
Does that answer
Yes,
the questions?
it does.
Excellent. Okay. And I know Art and I were talking about, before the session really began, accessibility of adding sound to the objects so that they could kind of point you in the right direction to go find your next thing, which would just be using the audio we learned this morning with William. So check my lesson list. So adding labels can help you add captions. We've talked about sound. So our last bit really is using what we've learned to flesh out the rest of your game. You know, do you want to add sound when you bump into a wall? Do you want to have things beep so you know what direction to start walking in? Those kinds of things, or just your graphics. You're still messing with how your layout looks. That's really what we have left to do. Is there anything I can go over again for anyone?
Well, with no one popping up, I'm just really mystified by a little error. I
Excellent.
found a use statement, libraries, game, graphics, library. When I try to instantiate it, it always gives me an error and says, oh, you don't have the right library.
Do you have libraries, games, graphics library, or libraries, games, graphics label?
I have libraries, game, graphics, label.
Okay,
That's-
you said
that's my use statement.
otherwise.
And then right down in the class main, I've typed a capital L label, space, lowercase label, turns green, but when you run it, it says at that line, you haven't specified a library label yet. Isn't that crazy?
Share your screen, maybe?
Don't think
What?
Share your screen, maybe?
I can't hear you today.
You want to share your screen, maybe, so we?
Well, see, that's the problem. I'm programming on a different computer.
Okay, well, do you want to copy paste
you-
code into Slack?
I was gonna say, can you?
I can snip it and put it in Slack. Yeah, let me do that.
Cool.
Well, just take the whole file. That way we can.
Oh, do the whole file, copy and paste it into Slack. Oh, all right.
Otherwise, I got a funny feeling we're just going to ask you for the whole file right after you dump it as snippet. So.
All right. Just a second.
What I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Copy. Okay.
Any other while we're processing Tim's error? What else can we do, folks?
So I was looking at something in the libraries just to see if there was an option for this for set border color for the labels. And it doesn't look like there's any examples or anything on there. And so I've set it and it looks like everything is working just fine with my code, no errors. But the actual border color itself is not discernible. So I'm not sure what's going on with that.
If I remember correctly, the border color call is really, really light, and it kind of doesn't render quite how one would expect. And if I remember correctly, this is one of the things that will be cleaned up once the shaders are in. I forget exactly why. William would know better than I do, but I know he's out right now. But if I recall correctly, this is one of those things, it's not a bug. It is actually rendering according to the rules that it has internally, but it's a little wonky and it doesn't look right. So it'll be changed in a future release, possibly December, but yeah, it's a little wonky, and we hate it too because it shows up in Quorum Studio because like you've got like a properties window and the borders on the outside are almost invisible, like practically. And so we would actually like this fix because it doesn't look very nice. It looks visually kind of, I mean, I know we do accessibility stuff on the team, but we'd like it to look good too. And a lot of it kind of looks wonky.
Just because it's accessible doesn't mean it has to be ugly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like, this is something on our radar, but it's a legit issue, so. Oh.
Cool. Okay, because I was like, I know that I set my border color to what is effectively black, but can't see any black outline
Adam,
around
you
my
might
white
want to
number.
also try. You can change border width. I think I saw.
Okay.
You might.
I wasn't sure if there was that as an option too.
I think I saw that in the library. Yes.
For Tim, it looks like Gabriel said you misspelled label.
Yes, that was it. Totally typo again.
It's all
Number one problem.
Welcome to programming. That's how it is.
That's what I always tell my kids is, did you spell it right? And if you spelled it wrong, did you spell it wrong everywhere? If you spell a variable name wrong, that's fine. You just have to keep it spelled wrong every time you use it.
Yeah, but I can't go in and make a new library spelled L-A-B-L-E. I don't want to do that. So I'll just spell it right.
If it makes you feel better, not this release, but a couple of releases ago, I had added this function. It was like a statistics function, and I consistently spelled it wrong across the entire standard library so badly that eventually the compiler like realized it was in a wrong file when I did this other thing, and I had to go in and change it in like 100 different places because of it. So it happens to the best of us. So
all right,
it is what it is. It's not spelled cumulative, but oh, my brain did not catch that.
And yes, Teresa, if you're going to be wrong, you have to be consistently wrong.
So how do you change the color of the text?
Ooh.
I've got like label, colon, set color, open paren, and then you have to give it like either a color name, like which I'm assuming you define as a variable up above, or you give it the red, blue, green integer number.
So what I ended up doing, because I had this problem, I had to create a couple of color objects for this, and then I had to define what those color objects were, like the colors of them outside of it. And I think it also includes like the alpha as well, not just red, green, and blue. Okay.
Gamma and alpha, I think we're both in there.
Yeah.
But maybe that's what I'm missing. I don't have enough numbers. That could be it. All right.
Alpha is referring to the transparency. So if you put it at a particular value, it'll be completely opaque, and then if you put it at another value, it'll be completely invisible. So that's what.
If you leave it off like I did, it just throws up a red underline error.
It needs 4 things.
Yeah, okay.
Which one is the alpha number? Is it the fourth one?
I think
fourth one is alpha, but yes.
All right, that might be the reason why I can't see my border at all. Okay.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. Yeah,
All right.
RGBA is kind of the standard in computer graphics because they discovered that red, green, and blue put together, makes everything within the constraints of a monitor, which is called gamut. How'd that work, Mike? You're muted, but yeah.
It did work. Yeah, that fourth variable is what you need.
Gotcha. It's not very intuitive that's what it is, but the nice thing is, even though it's not the most intuitive thing in the world, that is like the way the math works. Like it's a straight up mathematical model, and it always works, right? Because it's a mathematical model, so it gives you the right answer. So anyway. And so tomorrow, I know people are kind of working on their game, so I'll just kind of mention it. Tomorrow, you will have a chance to show off anything that you built. You don't have to, of course, but there will be another session in the 2 to 4 time to finish any games with help, of course. And then the 4:30 to 6 is the epic showcase where people can show off whatever it is that they made. And you don't have to, but we always try to encourage people to do it because, a lot of programming is learning sort of the stuff, loops and conditionals and, all these kind of things. And that's important. But a lot of it also is kind of just taking a step back and no matter what your skill level, showing what you're able to put together because it can be kind of fun for others in the community. And it also points out that like, it doesn't have to be super fancy in order to be, fun or engaging or stuff like that. So if you're willing, it'd be great to see whatever you came up with in that that final time for tomorrow.
Hey, Adam, I'm awful at the camera. Can you show me or send me your camera code so that I can follow my guy